Howdy, folks, and welcome to Moose Podcast 259. I hope you had just as brilliant a week this past week as I had. Great week of simple, no other words than just simple fellowship, both in the wonders and the marvels that is our wild heritage and that simple thing called photography. I want to thank you for stopping by. I want to thank you for listening, and I want to thank you for reaching out. I really do appreciate hearing from you. You guys have had lots of kind words lately. I'm very grateful. So thank you ever so much. Also want to thank my good friends at Bedford Camera. Bedfords.com. They got PhotoCon coming up next month. They have some killer specials. And of course, for everybody who listens and applies the MOOSE discount, you get to save some real money. Coming from people with a huge inventory, great information, great service, Bedfords.com. Thank you so much. You guys feed my addiction, and I am ever so grateful for sponsoring the Moose Podcast. So thank you so much. I want to get right into this week's podcast. That fine line. Well, I mentioned I had a really amazing week this past week. In fact, if this podcast isn't 100% coherent, because of 10 days of getting up, I think the latest I got up was 4:15 in the morning over the last 10 days. And I had such a great group of scouters, photographers, nature lovers, explorers, coffee connoisseurs, bourbon connoisseurs. Oh, that was great. In the evenings at St. James, that, I might not be 100% coherent this podcast, so my apologies, but I'm going to do my best. That fine line. Now, I've mentioned many times on the podcast how for myself personally, a couple of things I have that are my personal standards. For example, I don't crop my images in post. It's just something, pounded in my head for the first 20 plus years of my professional career working with photo buyers and working with conventional images where your image was inside that cardboard mount. At the same time, that real personal drive for craftsmanship and getting it right in the camera. There's just a fine line for myself of what is literally acceptable. And I'm talking about strictly my own photographic standards and not acceptable. And it is a really fine line. And it was once again brought to my attention when I'm showing some what you might think are basic Photoshop lessons in finishing to a group of some people literally on the third day of this last workshop downloading Photoshop for the very first time. I was showing for them. I was throwing them in the deep end, but I was giving them one big life preserver. I'm going to say a lifeboat. And the fine line between when I photograph bison and say, with my critters, they never see Photoshop, to showing them how to assemble a pano in post and then light that same image, there's a fine line there. And I think it's important for photographers to understand that those fine lines are ones that are established by each and every one of us. And I realize that if you were to look at the web and read articles and books, that fine line seems to be put out there as if it comes down from the heavens, like it's carved in the stone, as if you don't do it, nuclear holocaust is going to follow. And that's really not the case. So that fine line. I just mentioned a couple for myself. Cropping in post. I've done many a podcast on that very topic. And it was brought up again. Why do I have that standard? And I wanted to make sure I iterate the fact that whole thing with me and cropping is I know myself too well. And I got to learn myself even a little bit better this past week, thanks to those marvelous gentlemen and gals in my workshop there at the Philmont Scott Ranch. So I appreciate, learning a little bit more about myself and why I tick the way that I do. But when it comes to that standard, that craftsmanship, when you let yourself off the hook, at least for myself, I'm talking about myself personally here. It might, you could, if you are so of that mind, apply it to yourself, that when I let myself off on anything, it just doesn't work out. And I come back to regret it. Installed a new light today in the house. And the register in the ceiling, when it was put in originally, was not done correctly. And I looked at that and I said, it's going to bug me. So I finished the rest of the installation, and you know what? I turned it on, and let's be real. No one's going to take that lamp out of the ceiling and look and go, you know what? The register that you're putting this whole thing and attaching it to isn't done correctly. It's not like it's a fire hazard or safety hazard. It's just not done correctly. No one's going to know that except for me. Well, I finished the installation, and I'm looking at it, and the light comes on, the fan spins, everything's good. But it's not done with craftsmanship. So I'm going to take it all out tomorrow, and I'm going to get a new register because the one that's in there is not working correctly. I'm going to take the old one out, put a new one in, and you'll never know the difference when you see the end result, the light coming on, the fan spinning. But I know, and that's that fine line. I know. Going through the Bull Roundup with these folks and look at their images gave away a little bit of, you could say, my own personal secrets when I can tell that someone has done this, that, or the other to their photograph in post, which includes cropping. And it was interesting. I was watching the faces of the group when I talked about that crop. And in their faces, as their jaws slowly dropped and their eyes got big, when it was obvious I knew something had happened and they hadn't seen it, they realized that fine line, to those you could say in the know, instantly credibility starts to get chipped away. Now, that credibility, how important is it? If you're putting images up on Instagram or Facebook, that kind of sharing, and I can't encourage you to share. I had a delightful guy, Stanley, God bless his soul. He couldn't tell a story in less than half an hour, but man, he really cared about his craft, and he cares about sharing all that he has learned, and he brings prints to make sure people, he shares his photography with those. I mean, he's just a gem. Just a gem. But, that whole getting it dead right in the camera, it was embraced by all these guys that maybe before they hadn't thought about it. But then when it was put in front of them, they all like, oh yeah, that's a fine line. But yeah, I get it. That thing called craftsmanship. I have never had a group of photographers embrace exposure compensation and white balance like this group did. And not that they instantly mastered it, because that doesn't work. Didn't work. It was decades for me, but they instantly embraced it and thought about it and started asking questions about it. even though it's a fine line between minus a third and minus 2/3 a stop. They start asking of themselves, of their photographs, and of me in this scenario, what should I do? Because of that very fine line in telling the story about the subject. And probably what made the week so incredibly satisfying from my point of view as an instructor and a teacher and a mentor was by the end of that week when we did that bull roundup, and they were looking at that fine line because the whole week was really about light. And we used Philmont Scout Ranch as this incredible canvas or buffet or palette in which we cherry picked these different scenarios to push them into looking at this stuff. That one of the guys said on Monday he would never have thought and never would have ever, he was emphasized, included the sun in the photograph. But then he took this portrait of two wranglers with the sun in the picture, an outstandingly gorgeous picture. And he said on Friday, I would never have thought of that. I did it. And guess what? Was just, understanding that fine line in exposure, I was able to tell a story of that sunset in New Mexico with wranglers on horses. And it was a gorgeous photograph. The final photograph was just knock you down dead. So that fine line, it really kind of gravitates through everything we do as a photographer. From the point of the fine line of, do I shoot a 24 millimeter or do I shoot a 28 millimeter or 35 millimeter? What focal length? That fine line as, do I stand on the ground? Do I walk up 3 steps in that stockade? Do I walk up to the first platform in the stockade? Do I walk up to the top platform in the stockade to photograph Tooth of Truth, excuse me. Where does that line start? Where does it end? And probably more important is that fine line. Who actually draws that fine line? I encourage that all these folks, and they were just, they were all sponges. That's probably why I was able to go for 10 days with really no sleep. Because let me tell you, today, dragging. But all these sponges were asking about that fine line. That fine line even went to, taking out the iPhone and what it did as a capture device in homogenizing the whole scene and pretty kind of replicating what we're seeing, not quite. And then taking that DSLR and saying, oh, well, a DSLR is not doing all the iPhone is doing. I have this quality file, which I'm not getting from the iPhone. I have this raw file I can do so much with. I can make that beautiful 24 by 30 print. But how do I take what I'm seeing and transfer it to the viewfinder, to the finished photograph and the print? Those fine lines in every one of those steps, these bless their souls, these folks, they put their trust in me to take them across this landscape that they knew so much better than I. I think one person had been there 19 times, and this is my first. Yet, that person who had seen it 19 times, he said, I had never seen Philmont until I had come with you and put it in the viewfinder. That fine line that, our minds work on, and the creative and the emotional, the romantic, and the passionate mode we become as landscape photographers or any genre. That fine line is the one that you need to actually kind of recognize. You need to kind of embrace it. And at times, know when to go as far as that fine line, and you need to know when to step over it. And it is just that, a very fine line. And it's not one that I or anybody else should put down for you. It's not one that, other than yourself and what you want to say as a photographer, should be the line that which you either come up to or surpass to say, this is my story. I want to grab your heartstring with it. It's a fine line, and one you need to define and redefine every time you go out with a camera. I hope you all have a really great week. Fall color is starting to come here to Montana. First signs of the yellows and reds are popping out. Go out there and grab that polarizer, grab that underexposure, grab that wide angle lens or telephoto lens. Take those shots and share them. And remember to make every click your story.